President Biden is showing Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky some love, but someone else not so much love. First, the love. On Thursday, President Biden and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky are meeting. It is where they are meeting that shows the love. It will be in the Oval Office at the White House. Now, as for the nation's leader who's not getting a whole lot of love, that would be President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They are also meeting this week, but not at the White House. Their meeting is on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. There's no better way to describe it than as a diplomatic snub. It's not the White House. And also news tonight, 5 Americans detained in Iran have now been freed. They are on their way to Washington, D.C. after landing in Doha, Qatar earlier today. Their release is part of a deal brokered between the U.S. and Iran. In exchange for the Americans, the U.S. has released 5 Iranians facing charges and released $6 billion worth of Iranian assets. Not everyone is wild about the deal. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Congressman Mike Turner had this to say about the exchange.
I mean, whenever you put a price on American heads, you get an incentive for people to take more hostages.
These are $6 billion in frozen oil revenue.
Billions and billions of dollars, and so that's a concern. The administration says we're really only giving them their own money, but it's still money that they didn't have. The other aspect is that these monies can be used to support terrorist organizations.
Former President Donald Trump also commenting on the deal he took to Truth Social, writing, quote, "This absolutely ridiculous $6 billion hostage deal with Iran has set a terrible precedent for the future. Buckle up. You're going to see some terrible things start to happen. The 3 years ago highly respected USA has become a laughingstock all over the world. Make America great again. Vote Trump." End of quote. Now, the New York Times also posted an article on the exchange. In that article, the New York Times mentions Paul Rusesabagina, a human rights activist who had been detained in Rwanda, and Brittany Griner, an American basketball star detained in Russia. Both were freed. The article also mentions Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, who is still being detained in Russia. But somehow the New York Times, like the Biden administration, never mentions Americans Jimmy Wilgus or Thomas Swally. They are still being unjustly held in Russia. Yesterday, as I often do, I spoke to Jimmy Wilgus.
Trials, Tommy and I were indeed 100% on our own. Therefore, I can say with confidence that our government's prioritization of Brittany Griner, Trevor Reed, Paul Whelan, and Evan Gershkovich is not based on the details of their cases. It's not based on the law, and it's definitely not based on any suffering or any greater injustice they have endured than the majority of us Americans being victimized by the Russian legal system. Brittany Griner, Trevor Reed, Paul Whelan, and Evan Gershkovich were prioritized based on who they are and who they know.
James Foley was an American journalist. He was working in Syria in 2012 when he was kidnapped. In 2014, ISIS murdered him by decapitation, and then they posted on the internet. Now, of course, it's been taken down. His absolutely cruel killing, devastating to all Americans. You didn't have to know James Foley to be utterly devastated. Sometime later, I went to his family's home in New England and met with his parents. The heartbreak was, of course, obvious. You could even feel it. At the time, I wondered, how could anyone pick himself up after something so devastating? Well, Diane Foley, his mother, did. Through incredible strength and sense of purpose, she has made it her mission through the James W. Foley Legacy Foundation to advocate for freedom for all U.S. nationals wrongfully detained or held hostage abroad, to ensure government accountability, to prioritize their safe return, and to educate and protect journalists and international travelers. Diane Foley joins me. Nice to see you again, Diane.
Yeah, thank you, Greta. It's my pleasure.
You know, Diane, it's like, I remember like yesterday sitting in your house with you, and it's like, you know, I must admit I tip my hat for all that you've done for others, because, you know what happened to your family, it's just unthinkable, just unthinkable.
Well, there's been a lot of work to do, and there has been progress. So I'm very grateful whenever innocent Americans come home. But there's much work yet to be done, Greta.
How do you reconcile it? Because, I mean, obviously, I mean, it's so complex. I know people have taken sides like, you know, don't send the money or send the money or whatever. But it's actually, it's much more complicated than that. Because on the one hand, we don't want to put a target on other Americans, but how do we leave an American behind? You know, it's like, you know, and so, you know, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm always grateful when Americans come home. So I celebrate with the families whose loved ones came home, but my heart breaks for those who remain. And that is why every year we do annual research called Bringing Our Families Home. And this year, some of our recommendations, one of them is a need for a comprehensive review of our current hostage enterprise. Because when it was set up after Jim was murdered, it was focused very narrowly on hostage takers, primarily terrorists, criminals. But now the primary captor of our citizens are, in fact, nations like Iran, like Venezuela, Russia, Syria, China, and it makes it infinitely more complex. I'm always grateful when we negotiate. We must talk to our captors, much as we may dislike them and find them impossible to deal with. Otherwise, people die. People are abandoned, like our son Jim. So I applaud the courage of any administration who does this, because they will incur criticism, no doubt. It is a very complex thing to do. But I also think we need a comprehensive deterrence strategy for sure. So these are two of our top recommendations. We must, as a country, learn how to deal with this. Definitely, Greta.
Well, you and I lost an ally in this fight just recently, former Governor Bill Richardson, because Bill Richardson, and I know I've seen it on the website of the foundation, but he was also one of those in there, fighting to bring Americans home all the time. So he was, his death certainly is a loss, to that cause.
Huge. But I pray that his legacy will continue too, because we must keep fighting. And thank you, Greta, for your fight to help the Wilgus parents with their advocacy of their son, Jimmy. There are so many Americans in this gray zone that are not yet designated as wrongfully detained. And so we work behind the scenes all the time, but we're always grateful when people like you will bring these stories to light.
Well, you know where to find me if you want me to put a spotlight on. By the way, maybe sometime we'll talk about Austin Tice, because he's another missing American that has been sort of forgotten as well. Someplace, I still think he's alive. But Diane Foley, thank you very much, and thank you for all you've done. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Greta.